Greetings all. I'd like to welcome you to another reading of the book The Grand Design Exposed, and we are going to be continuing in Chapter 9, the Freemasonry Metamorphosis. But before we do, I would just like to give a quick shout out of support for a relatively young YouTuber. And let's see, he basically just started putting up videos roughly 4 months ago. Okay, and I just wanted to direct your attention to this individual's channel. It's Jonathan Mactemus. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Sorry if I butchered your last name there. And he's currently doing a book reading, and he also took it seems like he's also taken some time to give some scriptural advice too. And I just finished watching this video, and it does make you think. And about sexual depravity and these types of things regarding pornography and the unnatural facade of sexual encounters between a man and a woman, or husband and wife for that matter. Very interesting video there. I highly suggest you watch it. But he's doing a very, very interesting reading of a book called A Guide to the Phantom Dark Ages, of a theory that was put out by Emmett Scott, and previous to him a German writer by the name of Illig. Now, whether this theory proves out to be true or not is irrelevant, but the fact is that it is interesting to listen to this and question some things, and if these things prove to be true, and we can't rely on our own opinions, we're going to have to find a basis for these theories in Scripture. That 300 years have been, supposedly placed in the sands of time, roughly between 600 and 900 AD. And this book goes over, and I also got his reading on my playlist on my channel. And this book goes over, some evidences of, like, for example, how, like, archaeology is very, very similar from, like, the 6th century as to what we see in, or the 7th century as to what we see in the 10th century. And that there was no progression in between those centuries. Now, again, like I said, this isn't a etched in stone. This is truth. Go for it. He's reading this book as, to get us to think that maybe there is something happening here, and that we might want to think about these things. Okay, so that's why, that's basically the gist of what I'm getting at as far as reading his reading of this book. Hopefully I got that right. He is a biblical historicist, and he does believe in the continuation of history continued, from the beginning up to the present and into the future, and these types of things. So now, don't belittle him because he doesn't use the King James version of the Bible. He does use the World English Bible. But folks, let's not be, let's not bewilder him because he doesn't use the KJV. Okay, it's just a simple aspect of, if you use the KJV, use it. Use the KJV when he gives you scriptures and these types of things, and and just use your preferred version. So don't, just because he doesn't use the KJV doesn't mean he is, a bad guy. Okay. Um, he's just a simple person like you and I, and he is in search for truth. And, I admire that. So I wanted to give that shout out to his channel. And also, he has a WordPress site that you can check out. And his last post was on June 29th, so he hasn't made an update on his WordPress site, Thoughts of Scripture. But that's something else you can check out. Now, also, I wanted to direct you to a couple of interesting sites that you can do for your own research and studies. I'm not saying I agree with everything on this site, but they don't hold a specific opinion over another. They just lay everything out. And it's Bibliotheca Pleiades. And what this is basically, what it states here. It's a virtual library including information found on the internet in connection with reports, news, treatises, studies, theories, and findings made possible by a multitude of people and personalities, professors, teachers, scientists, researchers, experts in religion, politicians, philosophers, members of intelligence, etc., who have been devoted decades to informing the general public, most recently through the internet, of new information and a new way of seeing and interpreting history, sciences, sociopolitics, myths and legends, archaeology, and astronomy, etc. So, and it's kind of hard to navigate around this site, but obviously, here's the search engine. You just click on search and type in what you want. Like, for example, I'll type in Rosie Qua, which we made mention in the first reading of the 9th chapter. So, and my E on my keyboard likes to get stuck sometimes, so I apologize for that. And you just hit the search, and there you have it. There's a whole bunch of things you can look up, and here's one thing I was glancing over. So there, there's some interesting information on this site. I personally like this better than Wikipedia, but that's just my personal opinion. But there is a lot you can garner and glean from this website for research purposes. Another one I want to direct your attention to is CWAPA.co. Now, these guys are a little more biased. Very much so biased, because if you look at their column here, they have different sections. And even though they're biased, they do give you some good information on, for example, even though they put about CWAPA for great minds, and they have climate change, these types of things. But if you go down, all the way down, they have a section about the Jesuits, but they list it as for small minds. So, please don't be offended by that. These guys are, like I said, they are very biased. They don't acknowledge that, but that the Jesuits rule everything or anything like that. It's but what are you gonna do? You can't please everybody. But anyways, there is a lot of information you can glean from this as well. You just click on these arrows here, and you have agents, armies, histories, government, thinkers, press freedom. You can look up information on the Crown, agents, Zionism, hypocrisy, and cronyism, all under the Jesuit heading or for small minds. And again, there is some good information you can garner from this as well. So I just figured I'd drop some hints on a couple of sites if you want to go and check these things out for your researching pleasures. And hopefully you will find some things useful between these two web pages, and I will put them in the description box below as well as the comment section. But again, shout out to John. I think he is starting out very well, and I just want to encourage him to continue doing what he's doing. I advise you just to give him a listen and see what you think. He's got some good arguments on certain doctrines of historicism here. He got part 1 and part 2, some things on the flat earth, and he's got some decent information on there that I think it'd be very helpful to check out and do your own due diligence and be a Berean, like we are called to do, and back up his claims with Scripture. Because especially with Historicism Dilemma Part 1 and Part 2, he does make some interesting points. And he's got a couple of good videos on the 501c3 churches and these types of things. So again, it's very I believe he's a very intelligent individual. He speaks very well, and and just give him a listen. Subscribe to his channel, like his videos, comment if you so need to. But again, let's not belittle him for him using a different translation of the Bible, okay? For those historicists out there that are King James only. This isn't let's not bash him for that, okay? He's got his own mind. He's got his own reasons for why he uses the English Bible, and I'm pretty sure in his spare time he might use the KJV. I don't know. I haven't spoke to him personally. I'd like to. But regardless, give him a sub and help him out with likes and views and these types of things. I think you might like his work. So I just wanted to come at you with this intro before we get to the reading. So here we go. Okay, and back to the reading of the book The Grand Design Exposed, Chapter 9. This will be Part 2 of Chapter 9, called The Freemasonry Metamorphosis. And we left off, and we're going to pick up in the section called The Catholic Jacobite Freemasonry Goes French. But before we do, I want to backtrack to a key portion of this book that I really wanted to hone in on. And it was on page 108. And I'm going to start off this key portion with the section where it talks about the Jesuits. And I'm going to read it here. And it says, "The Jesuits, masters of intrigue, shrewdly employed the very same system that Protestants had used successfully in their fight against popery. Now they use for a direct opposite purpose. In the manuscripts of the Prince of Hesse, published by L'École de Canteleu, it is declared that in 1714 the Jesuits used the mysteries of the Rose-Croix. Mirabeau also relates that, quote, the Jesuits profited by the internal troubles of the reign of Charles I to possess themselves of the symbols of the allegories and the carpets of the Rose-Croix Masons, who were only the ancient order of the Templars secretly perpetuated." And again, Rose-Croix is also where we get the term Rosicrucianism. Okay? Now, this is an important paragraph here that I really want you to pay attention to. "As there were two streams of Reformation in England, one within the English Anglican Church and the other outside of it, so there were two streams of Freemasonry. the original being the Knights Templar, who founded and heralded the Protestant cause, the other the Roman Catholic countermeasure. Now, again, as stated in Chapter 2, that the Templars, in a sense, paved way for the Protestant Reformation, in a sense that the Templars protested Rome from a secular standpoint, from a vendetta standpoint, because of the betrayal of the Templars via the papacy, the Roman Catholic Church. And so they moved underground and they formed their own societies and these types of things to combat Romanism. But this was a Protestantism that was unscriptural. This was done via a vendetta against the church. The Knights Templar were virtually thrust into their situation to be fugitives on the run, and became protesters of their three enemies, the monarchy, the Hospitallers, and the church. And bear in mind, the Knights Templar were very occultic in origin, and the seat of occultism is found at Rome. So you can see the hypocrisy that Romanism perpetuated against the Knights Templars, who themselves being occultic in nature, and these types of things with their mysteries and these types of things. It's quite humorous. But as their cause began to firmly take shape among the common people and the lower parish priests, producing the Protestant Revolution, Catholicism, out of pure necessity to confuse her opposition, formed its own brand of Freemasonry, and to make the confusion and conspiracy that much more effective, pay attention, appearing even contradictive. Okay, so Catholicism's own brand of Freemasonry was put forth, but to add a little confusion to the masses, they developed an interesting scheme, which has been very effective, because you hear this over and over again, that Rome has nothing to do with Freemasonry, but it only was an appearance of being contradictive. Popes issued their decrees of condemnation and excommunication against anyone who became a Freemason, not making a distinction between the two. So, I wanted to bring that point out again before we start off in the next section. Catholic Jacobite Freemasonry goes French. When the Stuarts went into exile, the Jacobites who fled to France with James II took also their version of Freemasonry with them. With the help of the French and the Jesuits, they established lodges, and their Masonic rites and symbols were used to promote the cause of the Stuarts. Historian Nesta H. Webster tells us in her book, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, page 143, quote, that the Freemasons of France in about 1741 was not only so Christian, but so Catholic in character as to have given rise to the belief that it was devised by the Jesuits in order to counteract the attacks of which Catholicism was the object. Scots Masonry was intended to be a Roman Catholic, as well as a Stuart form of Freemasonry, in which none but those devoted to both restorations were to be admitted, unquote. For a time, the two systems of Freemasonry pursued parallel and rival courses of development. But with the force of the Stuart cause, the Jacobite system gradually gained the ascendancy. Out of it, there eventually evolved in 1773 the most important Freemasonic body in France, the Grand Orient. The historian Macklin, in his book, The Jacobites, page 140, says, quote, There is no question but that the Jacobites had a crucial influence on the development of Freemasonry, to such an extent, indeed, that later witnesses went so far as to describe Freemasonry as a gigantic Jacobite conspiracy. In 1722, a man named the Duke of Wharton managed to get himself elected Grand Master of England's Grand Lodge. Subsequently, he was publicly accused of both being a Jacobite leader and attempting to capture Freemasonry for the Jacobites. The following year, he was succeeded by a pro-Protestant, and leaving England abruptly without any ceremony, the next we hear of him, he is appointed in 1728 as the first Grand Master of the first recorded lodge in France. Wharton's travels takes him to Vienna, where he hoped to persuade the Austrian Habsburgs to mount an invasion of England on behalf of the Stuarts. Next he is in Rome, then to Madrid, where he founded the first lodge in Spain. It was in the year 1729, and those years immediately following, that the Jacobite French lodges began to rapidly proliferate, spawning other sympathetic lodges across Europe. Two major personalities emerged out of this crowd of sympathizers who became prominent on the origins of Jacobite French Masonry. One was Earl of Derwentwater, Charles Radcliffe, who was one of the founders of the first French lodge in 1725. The other was Chevalier Andrew Michael Ramsay. The history of Freemasonry after arriving on the continent takes on a complete change of character from what it was in England. The English Grand Lodge had then, and still does today, only 3 levels of initiation for those coming into their lodges. They were entered Apprentice Mason, Fellow Craft Mason, and Master Mason, and compares to the 3 degrees of basic, quote-unquote, Blue Lodge Craft Masonry of today. On this foundation, the French, who felt English Masonry was too coarse for their refined taste as gentlemen, and with the Jesuits' love for pageantry, built a system and scheme which promised to teach zealous initiates the secret mysteries of higher learning. And I just want to point out that there is an interesting chapter in the book Rulers of Evil that is entitled Medici Learning, and there you will hear about learning against learning and these type of things. Anyways, back to the reading. I'll just back up to the beginning of that sentence. On this foundation, the French, who felt English Masonry was too coarse for their refined taste as gentlemen, and with the Jesuits' love for pageantry, built a system and scheme which promised to teach zealous initiates the secret mysteries of higher learning, attainable, working their way through higher degrees. It was held out to the initiates that they would learn alchemy, be able to transmute metals, medical secrets. These are the initiates in these types of things, and all manner of gross superstitions, such as exorcism, ghost raising, and magic, as being attainable mysteries. Jacobite Freemasonry also offered something markedly more dramatic, more romantic, more grandiose. A new generation of mystical knights and warriors charged with the exalted mission of reclaiming a kingdom and restoring a sacred bloodline to its throne. Jesuitry had brought the parallels of the Templars full circle. The refining genius of the French, their love for show and being connected with the court of an absolute monarch, James II, made them invent ranks, ornamented with titles, ribbons, and stars, highly relished by that vain people. The price to be a part of this grand deception was high, but eagerly paid for, which became a rich fund to relieve the wants and costs of the banished unfortunate Stuart family and Jacobite cause. France, and then Germany, after the Jacobite dream was dead, became hotbeds where pernicious seeds were sown and tenderly reared among the cosmopolitan brotherhood, from the Greek words cosmos, meaning world, and polis, a city, to choke and corrupt every moral principle that secret English Masonry and the Protestant Revolution had ever promoted. It set off the proliferation of hundreds upon hundreds of new Masonic orders and degrees, and sparked the creation of new legends and new fantasies that confuses any serious attempt to comprehend the true origins of Freemasonry. A person who loves life certainly is not knowingly going to take poison. The same can be said of one who honors truth. They are not going to swallow a blatant lie. Now pay attention here. But mix truth skillfully with just the right amount of falsehood, and you will have the perfect concoction to deceive and lure untold amount of victims. The effects are no less deadly than if they had taken poison. The scriptures declare that the whole world is deceived. Freemasonry, when it left England, followed the Stuart cause. What it was developed into in both France and Germany became the greatest hoax and deception ever to be imposed and swallowed by mankind. Regardless of the philanthropic and harmless fraternal image apologists persist to portray, whether believe or not, Freemasonry emerged with the stamp and mold of the Jesuits written all over it. To emphasize the point again, this French and German Freemasonry concoction had its origins among the aristocrats, the noble class, the king's courts, and the Jesuits. The common class of people never knew what was going on, the same as today, till after the fact. Then, like leaves in a stream bed, they are swept along with the current. But that you may better grasp the nobleman's involvement, let's take a regular dictionary and define several words known to the nobility in proper rank sequence that may be foreign to us today. And these words in proper rank sequence are as follows. Lord, which equals a person who has dominion over others as a feudal superior. Prince equals a non-reigning male member of a royal family, the ruler of a principality. Principality equals a state ruled by a prince. Duke equals, in continental Europe, the sovereign of a small state, a British nobleman ranking immediately below a prince. Marquis equals a nobleman ranking next below a duke. Earl equals a British nobleman of rank below a marquis. A viscount equals a nobleman next below an earl. And a baron equals a member of the lowest grade of nobility. When you read history now and see these titles attached to names, make a proper mental note of which class of people that was agitating society. The picture that is drawn when studying the aristocracy, whether they are kings, popes, or noblemen, noticing the oppressive laws they impose upon their subjects to keep them docile and in control, but by their own vile and scandalous acts of immorality, murder, and wars among themselves to satiate their greed and royal places of power, demonstrates most vividly that they are really the lowest of society, arrogantly believing that they are above all law, especially their own. For example, the Earls of Derwentwater, James Radcliffe, who had already been executed for his part in the 1715 Stuart Rebellion, and his younger brother, Charles Radcliffe, were no less than the illegitimate grandchildren of King Charles II. Charles Radcliffe in 1725, as already mentioned, was the primary founder to first establish the authoritative Lodge of St. Thomas in France. His co-founders were several men of power and wealth, which included ship owners that provided vessels for Charles Edward Stuart's last expedition in 1745. For 20 years, he worked tirelessly to spread wide the cause of Jacobite French Masonry. He became an associate of Chevalier Andrew Ramsay. He also became Grand Master of the very lodge he had originally founded, on the same date, December 26, 1736. That Ramsay gave a speech, known as Ramsay's Oration, that electrified French Masonry, but like his brother, for his active role in the 1745 Stuart Rebellion, it cost him his life. Being captured, he was sentenced to death. Andrew Ramsay, Rome's con man. Chevalier Andrew Michael Ramsay was an extraordinary individual. The circles he traveled in testifies of this. Born in Scotland in about 1681, he was educated at the University of Edinburgh. In 1709, he was appointed tutor to the children of the Earl of Wemyss, but becoming embroiled in the religious turmoil rending Scotland at the time. In 1710, he went to France, making tracks straight for the renowned liberal Catholic philosopher, Archbishop Francois Fenelon. It is here some historians claim he was converted to Catholicism, which seems rather dubious, the fact that his opinions were well molded beforehand to abandon Scotland, then rushing to be under the patronage of Fenelon speaks for itself. Nevertheless, he regarded Fenelon to be his mentor. After Fenelon's death in 1715, he came to Paris and was appointed instructor to the Duc de Château-Thierry, and following that, to the Prince de Touraine. He became an intimate of the French regent, Philippe d'Orléans, who for his service rewarded Ramsay with a French knighthood by inducting him as a chevalier, or Knight of the Order of St. Lazarus. From then on, he was known in French Masonic history as the Chevalier Ramsay. And by 1720, Ramsay was fully involved in the Jacobite cause. It was about this time that he was called to Rome. Exiled King James III, the Old Pretender, needed a tutor for his heir and exiled son. Remaining in Rome for a time, Chevalier Andrew Ramsay set to educating the young Charles Edward Stuart, who, if all the Catholic geniuses had their way, would soon be seated on the British throne. In 1729, Ramsay is in England, and was promptly admitted to the Royal Society, no longer pure, but merging with its opposition. By 1730, he was back in France, working with Charles Radcliffe, and increasingly active on behalf of Jacobite French Masonry, by his eminent learning, his elegant talents, his amiable character, and particularly his esteem at court. After all, he was a tutor to royalty, gave great influence to what he had to say. When he spoke, others listened. By December 26, 1736, he had something very much to say. The Ramsay Oration. That might be something you might want to look up, via the internet and certain sites and stuff like that, so you can get a full understanding of what this Ramsay Oration was about. The meaning of the word Freemasonry. At this point, we must attempt to unravel a mystery that in proportion it tends to twist and confuse the mind. The mystery referred to is the origin of the word Freemasonry itself. The first step to understanding, once you get past all the misinformation that abounds, is to keep in mind that the word Masonry, with its initial letter capitalized, is strictly an allegory and symbolic figure to Masonry where the initial letter is not capitalized, which simply means men who are builders in stone. The key thought being builders. In other words, originally, those aristocratic freeborn men, because of the situation they found themselves, became Freemasons, allegorically speaking, because now they were builders of a more noble cause, not in stone, but the temple of their own order. There is no other connection between the two words or groups of men. But let's lay this thing out somewhat so that you may see clearly and logically how this imagery came about, and to see how the same cover of Masonry that benefited the Roman Catholic Templars in England, who were forced into a Protestant situation opposing Catholicism, also became a cover for the Roman Catholic Stuarts as French Jacobite Masonry to promote Catholicism. When the Knights Templar were suppressed, the only way the hunted Templars could continue to stay in contact with each other and help each other was in the darkest secrecy. And the immediate secret society needed to save their lives was already uniquely equipped, since their own order had functioned for years in secrecy with codes, passwords, and its own spy system. As time evolved, symbolic ritual drama became the means and objective through which future generations could keep the secret society alive and growing, rescuing the Order of the Temple from the cessation ordered for it by King and Pope. Claims have been made in past years to confuse the scent and trail to Rome, that the Masonic secret society originated with the builders of the first Temple of Solomon or medieval guilds of stonemasons in Britain, along with other suggestions even more fanciful, which is sheer nonsense. We know that the real Temple of Solomon was fully completed and in use for several centuries. Nor is there a shred of factual evidence of any kind of an alliance between stonemasons and the Templars after their suppression. The ancient guilds, being almost militantly religious, devoutly dedicated to the building businesses of the Roman Catholic Church, but made up of the common class people, certainly were not inclined to risk being associated and protectors of declared heretics, no matter how much history is twisted to make it appear so. By the decree of the Papal Council of Toulouse in 1229, any man who harbored a heretic was to lose his property, his house to be demolished, land to be confiscated by the church, and both heretics and protectors to be sentenced to death. A pretty mean deterrent indeed. The Templars, though, were in fact vigorous and extensive builders, constructing awesome fortresses and castles wherever they went in the world, not to mention the elaborate cathedrals and churches in Europe and Britain. Between 1170 and 1270, approximately 80 cathedrals were constructed in France alone. But the Templars were aristocrats and warriors, making them administrators who administered the craft of working or operative mason trade guilds. Doing menial labor was unthinkable. But construction being very much the regiment of Templar life, it was only normal to use it in an allegorical sense, to represent it as the unfinished building of their own order of the Temple of Solomon, the site where they took their name. Then, in their rituals, to symbolically play out, to always remind them of the treacherous betrayal of their enemies, the king, pope, and Knights Hospitallers, in their unforgivable acts of destroying the temple order and murdering their master. The Templars, as we have already seen, had taken their name from the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. The Bible account records that King Solomon hired King Hiram and his men of Tyre to assist him in building the Lord's temple. Upon that truth, the story and legend the Templars built, which is played out in Freemasonry, is purely allegorical. The Hiramic legend was adopted by the Templars as symbolic of the destruction of their order. In the drama, the catastrophe they lamented was the catastrophe that destroyed their order, their impotence to function as an order and fulfill their order's purpose. The fate of Hiram Abiff, also in the drama of Freemasonry, has no Bible support, but instead, the mourning of the murder of Hiram Abiff as the master builder portrayed the Templars' feelings of emotion because their own master builder, Jacques de Molay, had barbarously been put to death. Is the principle beginning to come clear? And what was the ultimate goal of the Knights Templar before they were suppressed? The same as Rome's universal name, Catholic, has always implied a global, socialist, totalitarian rulership. Old Babylon, laboratory for globalism. Let's reflect on that a moment. The concept of a world empire certainly did not originate with the Knights Templar, or even the Catholic Church, for that matter, or even Rome herself. To the most casual student of Scripture, it must be recognized that the empires that God described in vision given to the prophet Daniel were world empires, encompassing the people in the then known world. The city of Babel, founded by Nimrod, incredible as it seems, became the laboratory which contagiously affected certain minds in all generations with the disease and obsession to dominate over others. The city of Babel, later to become Old Babylon, was the origin and fountainhead of all organized higher learning. They studied the heavens and invented astrology, numerology, and the zodiac. Their initiates became illumined. It was here that the Babylonian elite developed their illuminated mystery schools into a system of high priest god kings, or Pontifex Maximus, to rule over the masses. The whole concept of Pontifex Maximus has its origin in Babylon. Okay? And what they experimented within the Babylonian testing ground was later perfected and refined through practical demonstrations on an ever-expanding world. The God King, Pontifex Maximus, has come down in succession in each world empire since leaving Old Babylon, beginning first with Egypt, where the religion was internally perfected in a church-state structure, unifying religion with the state. Then next, the Assyrians perfected the external structure by developing their armed forces into a military machine the likes the world had never seen before, to conquer and militarily enforce that religion. The prophet Daniel was shown in sequence to the last four world empires coming after Assyria, right to and beyond our own day as New Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. You can read about these succession of empires in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. Old Babylon became the prototype that affected and influenced every civilization of every culture in every nation on every continent of this earth, and that includes the civilizations of the so-called New World before the Europeans arrived. And the Babylonian mystery schools have persisted ever since they were first instituted in Old Babylon. They declare themselves the elite of humanity, and have always been found at the apex of power of the priest-king system, hidden but virtually controlling all. The initiates, when fully illumined, always came away with a plan to dominate the world. Global ambitions surely did not begin with Rome, or the Catholic Church, or the Brotherhood of the Brotherhood of the Snake, or the Rashania, or the Assassins, or Knights Templar, or Freemasonry, but they were all certainly a part of that plan. And you can believe this, the world today is in the harvest time of that plan, and will be recognized when very soon now you will see the Pontifex Maximus ruling from the city the Crusaders were sent to conquer, and where the Templars took their name, Jerusalem. Now, John Daniels seems very apt that this is what's going to happen. Whether it happens or not, God knows. But when you look at how they have created a false system of prophecy, and which is a counterfeit 70th week of Daniel, they need a Pontifex Maximus or a Pope, and it has to come from Rome, okay? Or they need some kind of figure to step in a rebuilt temple, if God willing lets this happen, to create a false 70th week and to stop sacrifices in the midst of the week, confusing all the Christians out there that have believed this eschatology for years. And then when the 70th week is finally over, then those believing in a rapture will realize they haven't been raptured yet. And then the real man of sin will make his appearance in Jerusalem, thus deceiving the entire world. Now, rather it goes down like that, obviously that's speculation, because really there is no scriptural proof that there is going to be a counterfeit 70th week, but we know there is historical proof that that is exactly what has been portrayed in the realm of futurism. And you can better believe that all the things you read about in the news and these types of things regarding Jerusalem and Israel and these types of things all point towards this fulfillment of a futurist prophecy. And this fulfillment really started to take fruition in 1948 with the creation of the State of Israel. Because after that, then all these Christians who were believing this futurist doctrine now all of a sudden has turned their focus over to Israel. And now you have movements like the Christian Israel Alliance and these types of things, and the John Hagees out there, and all of these futurists and these types of things giving money to the temple institutes to support the rebuilding of a temple, because that's going to be the linchpin of when we are quote unquote going to be raptured. Okay? And when that rapture does not happen, there's three versions of the rapture. You have pre, mid, and post. Then those that were pre would possibly move towards the mid, and those that are mid will realize that, okay, we're still here, we'll move to the post-trib camp. And when that doesn't work, well, then apparently, since they've been indoctrinated for so long, either one or two things will happen. Now, this is all, like I said, speculative. I can't say for sure this is how it's going to go down. But one or two things could happen. Let's just say that. Is either scales will be removed from the eyes of the Christian and they will finally get it. And they will finally understand what historicists alike were saying for a long, long time. And they will have their eyes opened and they will repent, or they will succumb to the real man of sin after this phony 70th week plays out. If it plays out like this. If God allows it to play out like this. But like I said, it certainly seems like it's heading that way. Anyway, back to the reading. And we're almost done with the conclusion of this chapter, so we're going to finish it. Ramsay's oration energizes French Catholic Freemasonry. The speech of Ramsay became a major historical landmark for Freemasonry. Its motivational purpose and message became quite clear from the results it accomplished. It must be realized that Ramsay's oration wasn't just a speech given verbally to be later forgotten, but it was published so that it could be fully assimilated by future readers all over Europe. His speech set both in a framework, a picture of a grand work that once began would become global in scope. Ramsay, a well-placed Scot and a Freemason renowned for his movements and influence among the Catholic aristocratic elite, captivated and energized his audience with some very astonishing remarks. Ramsay first got their attention by skillfully flattering their ego and vanity, telling them that the Freemasonic order descended not from the repulsive common stonemasons as English Freemasonry had taught, but great warrior princes and noblemen who, like themselves, aspired to a worthy and noble Catholic Christian cause. Quote, I think this is part of that oration. Our ancestors, the Crusaders, gathered together from all parts of Christendom in the Holy Land, desired thus to reunite into one soul fraternity the individuals of all nations, unquote, said Ramsay. He also claimed that the ancient mystery schools of Ceres, Isis, Minerva, and Diana became connected with the order. But though they may have derived from the mystery schools of antiquity, they were, Ramsay asserted, fervently Christian. Being fervently Christian is a crucial image Rome must convey until she has properly educated and conditioned the world to receive her true occultic Babylonian nature. This is why Catholicism has chosen Christianity as its cover of what it really is. When you look at esoteric Catholicism, you'll realize it is what Mystery Babylon has always been. Like anyone trying to promote a falsehood, Rome poses with many masquerades and diversionary tactics to confuse and deceive the world. Her most effective pageantry we will name double-face. Unfolds something like this. A personage of great influence within the Catholic Church or Jesuit order emerges on the public scene, vigorously giving support to some liberal and offshoot radical teaching. Wide and tremendous public exposure is generated as the controversial issues are declared on one side, while the Church and Pope condemning and excommunicating adherents on the other side. All you gotta do is look at the election this year and look at the campaign in 2008. Same situation. It's called the doctrine of double-face, as what John Daniel alludes to here. Interestingly, though, the advocate who, after many years of work, often a lifetime, spreading and planting his controversial seeds, who has been publicly denounced and excommunicated as one who opposes the pure doctrines of the Church, is, just before death, reconciled, forgiven, and warmly received back into the Church of Rome. Years later, the radical teachings now become incorporated as the pure doctrines of Rome. Bishop of Ypres, Cornelius Johnson, and his Jansenists, Andrew Ramsay, Jesuit Adam Weishaupt Illuminati, Cagliostro, Jesuit George Tyrrell, the Modernist model, and French Jesuit mystic Teilhard de Chardin, whose brilliant and fascinating theories and speculations while living launched, after his death, the controversial liberation theology, are men whose rumblings are prime examples of Rome's quote-unquote other face, as she moves ever steadily toward change into her true Babylonian religious role. The Templars, and their policy of strictest secrecy in order to survive, used Freemasonry as a cover. But Ramsay alludes publicly that the Templars and Freemasonry were one and the same, blowing the Templar cover. He further condemns the English Grand Lodge, as well as other non-Jacobite forms of Freemasonry, as heretical, apostate, and republican, and goes on to say, his speech translated by English historian R.F. Gold in his 6 volumes, The History of Freemasonry, quote, "The word Freemason must therefore not be taken in a literal, gross, and material sense, as if our founders had been single workers in stone, or merely curious geniuses who wished to perfect the arts. They were not only skillful architects, desirous of consecrating their talents and goods to the construction of material temples, but also religious and warrior princes who designed to enlighten, edify, and protect the living temples of the Most High." Unquote. The work of the man Ramsay, regarded as his mentor, the French liberal mystical Catholic philosopher, Archbishop Francois Fenelon, whose mystical views were condemned by Rome amidst great turmoil, and was forced to submit, another double-faced example, began now to shine forth through his admiring student. In a statement taken almost verbatim from Fenelon, Ramsay declared, quote, "The world is nothing but a huge republic of which every nation is a family and every individual a child." Ramsay went on, quote, "The interests of the fraternity shall become those of the whole human race." Unquote. These statements galvanized and proved enormously influential among later political thinkers, not only in France, but elsewhere in Europe and the American colonies as well. Ramsay elaborated, quote, "At the time of the Crusades in Palestine, many princes, lords, and citizens associated themselves and vowed to restore the temple of the Christians in the Holy Land, and to employ themselves in bringing back their architecture to its first institution. They agreed upon several ancient signs and symbolic words drawn from the well of religion in order to recognize themselves amongst the heathen and Saracens. These signs and words were only communicated to those who promised solemnly, and even sometimes at the foot of the altar, never to reveal them. This sacred promise was therefore not an execrable oath, as it has been called, but a respectable bond to unite Christians of all nationalities." Unquote. Catholic City of God, a world citizenship. The idea of the Roman Empire corpse being revived and united by the Roman Catholic Church was one that was already prevalent over 1,000 years before Archbishop Fenelon and Andrew Ramsay came on the scene. Visions of a holy Roman Empire was fully expressed by St. Augustine, a citizen of Hippo in North Africa, who wrote between AD 354 and 430 in his monumental work and famous book, The City of God. The City of God leads the mind very directly towards the possibility of making the world into a theological and organized kingdom of heaven. And this Augustinian book called The City of God, I I'm going to read this sentence again, leads the mind very directly towards the possibility of making the world into a theological and organized kingdom of heaven. And this theology, you can really find this theology in the Kingdom Now theology, and you can even backtrack further through the preterism theology. Because the preterism theology preaches and teaches a spiritual second coming of Christ, which was fulfilled in 70 AD. So therefore, the new heavens and the new earth are encompassed within the church. And so we are essentially living in the millennial reign of Christ, establishing the city of God. That's what us finite human beings who are subject to decay and aging and all these things are being taught to believe in these realms of theology. It all stems from Augustine. The city, as Augustine puts it, is, quote, a spiritual society of the predestined faithful, unquote. But the step from that to a political application was not a very wide one. The church was to be the ruler of the world over all nations, the divinely led ruling power over a great league of the terrestrial states. In later years, these ideas developed into a definite political theory and policy. As the barbarian races settled and became Catholic Christians, the Pope began to claim an overlordship of their kings. In a few centuries, the Pope had become, in theory and to a great extent in practice, the Pontifex Maximus, high priest king, censor, judge, and divine monarch of Roman Catholic Christendom. His influence extending in the West far beyond the utmost range of the old empire. For more than 1,000 years, this idea of the unity of Christendom was an idea of a common brotherhood and a common loyalty to the Church, which dominated Europe. The history of Europe, from the 5th century onward, is very largely the history of the failure of this great idea of a divine world government to fully realize itself in practice. But today, Rome's grand design is prevailing, soon to usher in her centuries-long cosmopolitan dream, a united global citizenship to fruition. And the French take up the cause. Ramsay appealed urgently to France to take up the cause and become the center of the order. With great vigor and enthusiasm, France responded. As a result, one of the most predominant French Catholic systems that later evolved was the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, not having its origin in Scotland, but the French, and certainly not Protestant, but Catholic, whose Jesuits' guiding hands added 30 new degrees to the English already existing first 3, being based on Templarism. And that, again, was also called Protestant Freemasonry, even though it had nothing to do with true biblical faith. Okay? These 33 degrees, with some modifications, became the standard and are now exercised today the world over. Eventually, in 1773, out of the great proliferation and affiliated French lodges competing for supremacy, emerged the Grand Orient. That infamous lodge that was so active in the French Revolution, and also directly associated with the zealous members of the German Lodge Theodore, of whom the most conspicuous member was the modern Illuminist Jesuit Adam Weishaupt, professor of canon law at the Jesuit University of Ingolstadt. And this thus concludes Chapter 9 of the book, The Grand Design Exposed, the Freemasonry Metamorphosis. So I want to thank you for bearing with me in the reading of this, and the reading and the conclusion of this chapter. And we will pick up next time in Chapter 10. We are almost halfway through the book now. But Chapter 10 is called The Jesuit Brothers of the Pyramid, Shaping Events During the 1700s. Should be very interesting. So again, thank you for listening. Truth be told, truth be known, stay safe, God bless, and we will see you in the next reading. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.